Someone once said to me that church is a little bit like a soccer match that you might go and watch at your local park on the weekend, that there are 22 people running around doing everything who desperately need a bit of rest, being cheered on by hundreds of people on the sidelines who desperately need a bit of exercise. I wonder if your church is a little bit like that, where there are just a few people doing all the holy stuff whilst being cheered on by everyone else on the sidelines. Well, today we're going to think about 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 to 10, because in that passage, Peter turns that model of church on its head, and he says, no, every single believer, you and I, all of us have a part to play in building the church of God. In that passage in 1 Peter 2, verses 4 to 10, Peter says, you are being built into a spiritual house, a holy priesthood. No one is on the sidelines. Every believer is a living stone in God's temple. We are all alive, we are chosen, we are joined together, and all of us are engaged in Christian ministry, or at least should be. The question for you and I, when we go to church on a Sunday or whichever other day of the week we might go to church, the question is not, what can I get out of church? As if we go there to be entertained, and if the church isn't up to our standards or doesn't say the right stuff, then we're going to leave it and find another one. That's not the question. The question isn't, what can I get out of church? The question is, what can I bring to church through my gifts and my talents and my passions and my abilities in order to build this church stronger, in order to make it a living temple for God in my local community? You have a part to play then in building God's church. And what we're going to do now is have a look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 to 10, and think about 3 ways in which you can be effective in ministry for God as part of his church. It starts by standing close to Jesus. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, Peter says, as you come to him, the living stone. Now, ministry doesn't begin by finding a role in church. Ministry actually begins by coming close to Jesus, by working on your own spirituality. As Peter says here, as you come to him, that's where it all starts. Effective ministry for God doesn't begin with performance by what you do. It begins with proximity, how close you are to Jesus. Belonging precedes activity. Belonging to the church, belonging to Jesus, finding your identity in your relationship with God precedes any successful activity you might do. So we need to be near to Jesus. We need to be open to him. And the more we are open to him, the closer we get to him, then the roles that he wants us to take on in his kingdom, in his church, will make sense and become obvious to us. And the other thing to say is that when you come close to God, when you come close to Jesus, you get joined to other people who are coming close to Jesus as well. Peter says, we are living stones. Well, stones only build a wall when they become connected, when they get joined together through the mortar, when they get laid in place on top of one another, when a structural kind of organization begins to happen. If we're not a part of that, then we're just a pile of rubble on the floor and we are no good to God. If you want to be useful to God in ministry, then you need to be present to him and present to other people. So I would say, don't start by asking, what's my ministry? Start by asking the question, am I drawing close to Jesus? Am I developing in my spirituality? Am I drawing closer to him as each day passes? Because unless you receive from Jesus, unless you receive his grace and his love and his mercy and his forgiveness, you can't possibly pour that out to other people. Quite often, when I meet with other ministers, I might say to them, how are you? And invariably they say, oh, I'm really busy. Well, that wasn't the question I asked. I didn't ask how busy you are. I asked, how are you? But it's almost as if Christian ministers very often wear busyness as a sort of badge of pride or as a sign that we're doing our job well. How are you? I'm busy. Oh, well, you must be doing a good job then. But the reality is that the The most effective ministers aren't the busiest ministers. The most effective ministers are those who are anchored to Jesus and those who are drawing close to him day by day. And that's true for you as well. As you find your ministerial calling in the church, it's not that you should then become more and more busy in your local church, but that you should draw closer and closer in proximity to Jesus. So your first step towards effective ministry this week might be as simple as slowing down long enough to draw near to Jesus again. Secondly, if you want to be effective in ministry for God, then you need to treat every place like sacred ground. Now, in verse 5, Peter says this: "You also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood." Now, let me be absolutely straight with you. I believe that there is a special office in the church for priests. That's part of my church tradition as being a Church of England priest myself. And I think there are some things that ordained priests can do that other ministers can't do. However, in this passage, Peter says, you are a holy priesthood. So there's a sense in which this notion of priesthood isn't just retained by a few of us, but actually we are all priests in God's church. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a special role for a particular type of priest, but fundamentally, you and I as Christians are part of a holy priesthood. Now, what does that mean? Well, the word priest, if we were to take the Latin word for a high priest, the word is pontifex, which is why the Pope is called the pontiff. And the idea of a pontifex, the idea of a high priest, is that they form a bridge between God and their local community. So a priest, me as a priest of a local church, I'm trying to form a bridge. I'm trying to be the bridge through which God can meet with his people. And through my intercessory prayers and ministry, I'm trying to bring my people into the presence of God. Do you see? So a priest is a bridge between God and the people. Now, in this passage, Peter gives that role actually to everybody. You are a holy priesthood. Every believer is a walking intersection of heaven and earth. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is that every space you inhabit throughout your week becomes a sacred space. Wherever you show up, you are making it into a holy, sacred space. Sacred space isn't just limited to coming into a church building on a Sunday morning. So, where you go to work, or your classroom, or your kitchen when you're at home doing the dishes, or when you're playing with the kids, or when you're down the pub, or when you're in the gym, or when you're visiting neighbors, or going out for a barbecue, or whatever it is, wherever you show up, that's where your priesthood happens. That's where you are an intersection between heaven and earth. Your world is your temple of service. So in that sense, you don't then need to wait for a church program in which to serve. You already carry a holy presence into your everyday life. So this coming week, as a holy priest, you need to think of yourself as God's representative in every room that you walk into. Wherever you go, be a blessing to people. Wherever you go, notice their pain and minister into it. Wherever you go, speak truth gently. Make beauty where things are ugly. That's the role of a priest. That's my role as a priest in the Church of England, is to make everyday life holy. And you too are called into a priestly ministry where you make everyday life holy. That's what you're built for. That's what you're called to. You are a holy priesthood. And thirdly, if you want to be effective in ministry for God, you need to let your life point to the light. In verse 9 of 1 Peter chapter 2, Peter says this, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Now, God has rescued us from the kingdom of darkness. You and I were lost in our sins. We were enemies of God, but through the cross of Christ, we have been rescued from that kingdom of darkness, and we have been brought into the kingdom of light. And by doing that, God then reassigns us. He gives us a ministry. He gives us a way of living. He gives us a role in his church in order to carry out, to be effective as citizens of the light. So that's the heartbeat of ministry, if you like. Not that we are trying to impress people by our ministry, but we are trying to reveal God's character through how we live. We are trying to share God's light into the world through how we live and how we do ministry. You've got a story of how God has taken you from darkness into light. You've got a story to share. Your story isn't private. How God has saved you and what God has done in your life isn't a private matter. God has done that in order for you to share that with others, to encourage other people in their walk with God. So do you know your story? Are you able to share your story with other people in order to encourage them? Your life is a sermon through which other people encounter God. So when it comes to being effective in ministry for God, Peter is not picturing Christian ministry as sort of scattered individuals doing their own random good things in the world. He's describing a living structure, strong, interconnected, radiant with the presence of God. And with every new believer that is added to the church through baptism, the building expands, the temple becomes bigger, and the ministry of God becomes firmer. And, maybe the ultimate miracle of ministry is that God takes ordinary lives. He takes my life. And he takes your life. And out of all that brick dust, out of all that brokenness, out of all that fragility and flawed nature, he takes us and he shapes us together into his dwelling place, into his temple. Isn't that an extraordinary privilege for us to have? So this week, think to yourself, pray about it. How can you be the kind of person that God can build with? How can you be the kind of person who can be interconnected with others so that you play your part in building the living temple of God as a holy priest? How can you be solid in faith, joined to others, and full of light? Stop sitting in church and doing nothing and start building church. Start playing your role, if you're not already, in building God's church. Make yourself available to God. Be engaged with the privilege of building something that lasts. There's a recurring theme, isn't there, throughout Scripture in the calling of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ananias and Moses and all these people. They just stand there and they go, "Here I am, Lord. Send me." Can you be that type of person this week? Just to stand before God and say, "Here I am, send me. I will do what I can in the power of your Spirit to be effective in ministry for you." There is no greater calling than being a holy priest for God. There is no greater calling than being a living stone in his temple. This week, make that calling a reality in your life.